My son told my wife she was too stupid to understand business. He said it in front of 12 board members. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The coffee was still steaming when Margaret walked into my home office that morning, holding the quarterly report like it was evidence at a trial. "Robert, look at this." She set it beside my mug, her finger pointing to a line item. "The manufacturing costs are up 40%, but the worker wages haven't moved in 2 years. Where's the money going?" I studied the numbers. She was right. She was always right about the numbers. 43 years of marriage, and Margaret had reviewed every financial document that crossed my desk. She'd been doing it since we started Chen Manufacturing in our garage in 1981, when she kept the books while working full-time as a high school math teacher. "I'll ask David about it at the board meeting," I said. "I'm coming with you." I looked up. Margaret hadn't attended a board meeting in 5 years, not since I'd stepped back and made our son CEO. She'd said David needed space to lead without his parents hovering. "You sure?" I asked. "Something's wrong, Robert. I can feel it." She tapped the report. "And I want to see David explain this himself. We built Chen Manufacturing from nothing, precision metal components for aerospace and medical equipment. 42 years of 16-hour days, missed dinners, mortgaged houses, and absolute faith in each other. Margaret had been equal partner in every decision, every risk, every innovation. When our daughter Linda joined the company as VP of Operations 8 years ago, Margaret had mentored her through every challenge. Linda had her mother's mind for systems and details. Then came David. Our son had joined 5 years ago after a decade in private equity. Confident, charismatic, armed with an MBA from Wharton and connections we'd never had. Within 2 years, I'd made him CEO. He'd grown revenue by 35%, opened new markets, impressed investors. Margaret had supported the decision, but lately I'd noticed her going quiet when David's name came up. We dressed for the meeting, me in my gray suit, Margaret in the navy dress she saved for important occasions. We drove to the headquarters building in my Lincoln, past the original facility where we'd manufactured our first components by hand. The boardroom was full when we arrived. David sat at the head of the table in a custom suit that cost more than our first car. Linda sat halfway down, looking tense. David's smile tightened when he saw Margaret. "Mom, didn't know you'd be joining us." "Thought I'd sit in," Margaret said. "Like old times." She took a seat beside me. I noticed several board members nodding respectfully to her. People who remembered when she'd built the financial systems that still ran the company. David ran through his presentation. Growth projections, market expansion, acquisition targets. He spoke in the language of modern business, synergy, optimization, vertical integration. The board members nodded along, impressed. Then Margaret raised her hand. David paused mid-sentence. "Yes. The manufacturing costs," Margaret said. "They're up 40% year over year, but wages haven't increased. Can you explain the discrepancy?" "That's operational detail, Mon. Not really board-level discussion. I'm asking at the board level. Where's the money going?" A flash of irritation crossed David's face. "We've invested in efficiency improvements. New management structure. Consultant fees for the expansion strategy." Margaret pulled out her own copy of the report, marked with annotations. "The consultant fees are listed separately. So are the efficiency investments. This is a different line item entirely. Manufacturing overhead has nearly doubled. What's the actual spending?" David's jaw tightened. "I don't have that breakdown in front of me." "You should." Margaret's voice stayed level. "This represents $18 million. That's not trivial." "Mother." David set down his presentation remote. "I appreciate your interest. But the financial details are complex. This isn't like balancing a household budget." The room went quiet. Margaret's expression didn't change. "I know the difference between household budgets and corporate finance, David. I built the financial infrastructure you're currently using decades ago. The business has evolved significantly since then. Numbers don't evolve. They either add up or they don't." She pointed to another section. "You've also eliminated the profit-sharing program your father and I established. Why wasn't that brought to the board for approval?" "It was an operational efficiency decision. It was a core company principle." Margaret looked around the table. "Profit-sharing was written into our corporate values statement. Changing it requires board vote." David's voice hardened. "With respect, Mom, you haven't been actively involved in this company for years. You don't understand the competitive pressures we're facing. The old way of doing things, the family business mentality, it doesn't work at this scale. I understand that $18 million is missing an explanation. It's not missing. You just don't understand the modern accounting structures. David leaned forward. Look, I love you, but you're out of your depth here. This isn't a PDA meeting. Maybe you should leave the business decisions to people who actually understand corporate finance. The silence that followed was absolute. Linda stood up. David, that's completely out of line. Stay out of this, Linda. David didn't look at his sister. He kept his eyes on Margaret. Mom, I think it's best if you don't attend these meetings. You're confusing the board with questions based on outdated knowledge. Dad built this company, but he brought me in to modernize it. Your role is, well, it's in the past. Margaret stood slowly. Her hands were steady as she gathered her papers. Robert, she said quietly, we need to talk. Tonight. She walked out. David turned back to the board as if nothing had happened. Now, as I was saying about the acquisition targets. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was watching my daughter's face, pale with fury, and remembering every late night Margaret had spent building the company my son just dismissed as outdated. I found Margaret in her study when I got home, surrounded by filed boxes I hadn't seen in years. What are you doing? I asked. Due diligence. She didn't look up from the document she was reading. I pulled our copies of the last 3 years of financial records. The ones I'm still legally entitled to access as founding shareholder. I sat down across from her. Margaret, your son is stealing from the company. She said it calmly, like she was commenting on the weather. I'm just trying to determine how much and how long. She slid a spreadsheet across the desk, one she'd clearly spent hours building. Color-coded rows, highlighted discrepancies, notes in her precise handwriting. See this? Her finger traced a line. Manufacturing overhead goes to a subsidiary called Chun Operations Consulting. That subsidiary was created 2 years ago. It's registered to David and 3 board members, people he brought in after you made him CEO. I studied the numbers. That's not necessarily. They're billing the company for services at 3 times market rate. The subsidiary has 5 employees but charges for 20. They claim to provide operational oversight, but those functions are already covered by our actual operations team, the team Linda manages. She pulled out another document. Here's the real estate holdings. David bought a building in Manhattan through the subsidiary, using a company loan at below-market interest rates. He's renting it back to Chen Manufacturing at above-market rates. We're paying for him to build personal real estate equity. My stomach tightened. You're sure? Robert, I've been reading financial documents for 43 years. I taught advanced accounting to high school students who went on to become CPAs. I'm sure. She met my eyes. David isn't growing the company. He's extracting wealth from it, while making the numbers look good to investors. The profit-sharing elimination, the wage freeze, it's all to hide the money he's siphoning out. I sat back. The home office felt smaller suddenly, the walls too close. Why didn't you say something earlier? I suspected 6 months ago, but I needed proof. I'd been quietly documenting. She gestured to the boxes. I didn't want to believe it. He's our son. But after today, after the way he spoke to me, her voice finally wavered. He knew I was getting close to finding it. That's why he tried to humiliate me out of the room. My hands curled into fists. The disrespect was one thing. But theft, systematic, calculated theft from the company Margaret and I had built, Linda knows, Margaret continued. She came by this afternoon. She's been blocked from accessing certain financial records for the past year. David told her it was about executive privilege, but she knew something was wrong. She couldn't prove it without access. We need to call the police. No. Margaret's voice was firm. We need to be strategic. David has board members protecting him, people who are benefiting from the same schemes. If we go public now, they'll circle wagons. We need leverage. She pulled out another file. This one I recognized, our corporate bylaws, the original document from 1981. You and I together hold 51% of voting shares. We can remove David as CEO with a majority shareholder vote. No board approval required. It's buried in Article 7, Section 3. I've forgotten that clause. We'd included it as protection when we first incorporated, never imagining we'd need it against our own son. If we remove him, he'll know we found the fraud. Let him know. Margaret's eyes were steel. We remove him first, install Linda as interim CEO, then we audit everything publicly. By the time David realizes what's happening, his access is gone and the evidence is preserved. He'll fight. He can fight all he wants. The bylaws are clear. We call a special shareholder meeting, present our vote, and he's out. The board can't override it. She paused. But Robert, once we do this, there's no going back. He's our son. I looked at the evidence. Spread across the desk. $18 million in questionable transactions. Profit sharing eliminated. Workers frozen at wages that hadn't kept pace with inflation, while David paid himself from a subsidiary that existed only to extract money. Margaret, what he said to you today was revealing. She cut me off gently. He showed me who he's become. Someone who thinks intelligence is measured by degrees, not decades of work. Someone who sees people as outdated just because they're not part of his MBA network. She touched the spreadsheet. Someone who would steal from his own family. My phone buzzed. A text from David. We need to establish boundaries with Mom. She can't disrupt board meetings like that. I showed Margaret the message. She smiled, cold and sharp. Call Linda. Tell her to gather her own documentation from operations. Tell her to be ready to take over as CEO in 72 hours. Why 72 hours? Because that's how long it takes to call a special shareholder meeting under the bylaws. And because I want 3 days to make sure we have every piece of evidence documented. She started organizing the files into chronological order. Your son thinks I'm outdated. He's about to learn that outdated just means I remember how we built the foundations he's trying to steal. I called Linda. She answered immediately. Dad, your mother was right. We're removing David as CEO. Can you pull together all the operational records he's blocked you from? Silence. Then, when? 3 days. You'll be interim CEO by Friday. What do you need from me? Everything David doesn't want us to see. I'll have it by tomorrow. Her voice was tight, with controlled emotion. Dad, thank you for believing Mom. After we hung up, I sat with Margaret while she worked through the files. She moved with the same focused precision she'd shown for 4 decades. The math teacher who'd taught herself corporate accounting, who'd built spreadsheets before computers, who'd never forgotten a number or let a discrepancy slide. David thought she was outdated. He'd forgotten that outdated also meant experienced. Battle-tested. Unforgiving when it came to numbers that didn't add up. And he'd made the fatal mistake of underestimating her in public. Margaret, I said quietly. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. She looked up from her work. You trusted him. That's what fathers do. You trusted him too. No. She shook her head. I hope that was wrong about him. There's a difference. She turned back to the documents. Now let's make sure he never gets the chance to do this to another family's company. I spent that night beside her, reviewing every file, every transaction, every piece of evidence. By morning, we had enough to prove systematic fraud. By afternoon, the shareholder meeting notice was drafted. And by Friday, our son was going to learn what happened when you told Margaret Chen she didn't belong in the boardroom. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for Friday at 9 a.m. David didn't know about it until Thursday evening. Legally, we only needed 24 hours notice for special meetings. He called my cell at 8 p.m. What the hell is this about? A vote, I said calmly. Margaret and I are exercising our shareholder rights. A vote on what? You'll find out tomorrow. Be in the boardroom at 9. Dad, you can't just... I hung up. Margaret sat across from me, reviewing her presentation one final time. Linda had delivered 16 boxes of documentation, every blocked record, every suspicious transaction, every piece of evidence that David had tried to hide. We'd spent 3 days building an airtight case. At 8:55 a.m., we walked into the boardroom. Linda was already there, calm and ready. The board members filed in, confused about the emergency meeting. David arrived last, flanked by his 3 subsidiary partners, the board members who'd been profiting alongside him. This is irregular, one of them said. It's within our rights as majority shareholders, Margaret replied. She stood at the head of the table, laptop connected to the projector. We're calling a vote to remove David Chen as CEO, effective immediately. The room erupted. You can't do that, David said. Article 7, Section 3 of the corporate bylaws. Margaret displayed the document on the screen. Majority shareholders may remove executive officers with a simple majority vote. No board approval required. The provision was included when we incorporated in 1981. David's face went white. This is insane. You're sabotaging the company because Mom's feelings were hurt. No. Margaret advanced to the next slide. We're protecting the company from systematic fraud. The screen filled with the financial analysis she'd built, color-coded, annotated, undeniable. Chen Operations Consulting, a subsidiary created by David and 3 board members. It bills the company $18 million annually for services that duplicate our existing operations team. The subsidiary has 5 employees but charges for 20. The principals, David included, pay themselves from the subsidiary while freezing wages for actual manufacturing workers. She clicked to the next slide. Real estate transactions. David used company loans to purchase personal property through the subsidiary, then rented it back to Chen Manufacturing at inflated rates. Over 2 years, he's extracted $4.2 million in equity while we paid above market rent. Another slide. Eliminated profit sharing, a core company value requiring board approval. No vote was taken. The savings went directly to increased executive compensation, primarily through the subsidiary structure. She went through 12 slides, each more damaging than the last. The board members who weren't involved looked shocked. David's 3 partners looked trapped. This is a misunderstanding of complex corporate structures, David said desperately. Mom, you're reading these numbers wrong. I'm not. Margaret's voice cut through his excuse like a blade. I taught accounting for 30 years. I built the financial systems you're exploiting. These aren't complex structures. They're theft dressed up with LLC paperwork. She turned to the full board. We're not asking for board approval. We're informing you that as majority shareholders, Robert and I are removing David as CEO. Linda will assume the role immediately and will be conducting a full forensic audit. You can't prove intent, one of David's partners said. We don't need to prove intent for the shareholder vote. That's criminal prosecution territory. Margaret smiled coldly. But since you brought it up, we have 3 years of documented transactions, blocked records, and witness testimony from the operations team. Our attorneys have already reviewed everything. We'll let law enforcement decide about intent. David stood up. This is my company. I've grown it beyond anything you could have imagined. You're dinosaurs clinging to outdated values in a modern market. You should be thanking me for stealing. I spoke for the first time, my voice quiet but hard. For humiliating your mother? For eliminating the profit sharing that helped families send their kids to college? For extracting millions while telling workers there was no money for raises? I increased shareholder value. You stole from your own family. I stood up. And worse, you looked at your mother, the woman who built the systems you're exploiting, and told her she was too stupid to understand business. The room went absolutely silent. That's not what I said, David protested. You told me I was out of my depth, Margaret said. That I didn't understand modern corporate finance. That my knowledge was outdated. She closed her laptop. You were wrong on all counts. I understood exactly what you were doing. I just needed time to prove it. She turned to the board. All in favor of removing David Chen as CEO? Linda's hand went up immediately. Then the honest board members, 4 of them, people who'd worked with us for years. The rest sat frozen. Majority shareholders Robert and Margaret Chen? The corporate secretary asked. In favor, we said in unison. Motion passes. David Chen is removed as CEO effective immediately. Linda Chen is appointed interim CEO pending permanent placement. 2 security officers entered. We'd arranged it in advance. Mr. Chen, we'll need your access badge and company electronics. David looked at me, then Margaret, then Linda. You're making a mistake. I'm the only one who knows how to run this company at scale. You don't run companies, Margaret said. You extract from them. There's a difference. She nodded to the officers. They escorted David out, along with his 3 partners. We'd removed them from the board simultaneously. When the room cleared, Linda came to stand beside us. What do you need from me? She asked. Run the company the way it was meant to be run, I said. Take care of the workers. Make sustainable decisions. Build something that lasts beyond quarterly reports. And restore profit sharing, Margaret added. That's non-negotiable. Linda nodded. First thing. And Mom, I'm sorry he said those things to you. He showed me who he'd become. Better to know than to wonder. Margaret gathered her files. Now we rebuild. The next 6 months were difficult. The forensic audit confirmed everything Margaret had found. David had stolen $8.3 million over 3 years. We referred it to prosecutors. He hired expensive lawyers. The case was still pending, but the company stabilized. Linda restored profit sharing and gave workers a 10% raise, funded by eliminating the subsidiary fees. She promoted 3 senior operations people into management. Revenue dipped slightly, but profit margins actually improved with honest accounting. I returned to the office 3 days a week, mentoring Linda through challenges. Margaret came with me twice a week, reviewing financials and helping rebuild systems David had corrupted. The workers noticed. I'd hear them talking in break rooms about Mrs. Chen being back, about feeling like the company remembered its roots. One afternoon, Margaret and I stood in the original factory building, now expanded and modernized, but still the heart of manufacturing. Workers operated precision equipment, building components that would go into medical devices and aircraft. Think we did the right thing? I asked. Margaret watched the production line. We protected what we built. We stopped someone who would have destroyed it, even though he was our son. Yes, we did the right thing. It still hurts. Of course it hurts. He's our child. But he made his choices. She took my hand. We made ours. That evening, Linda called us into her office, my old office, where I'd made decisions for 40 years. I want to propose something, she said. A co-CEO structure. You and Ma. We're 71 years old, I said. And you have more institutional knowledge than anyone alive. Mom understands these systems better than any CFO I could hire. I can handle operations, but I need your wisdom. Both of you. She pulled out a proposal. Limited hours. Advisory capacity with decision authority. And proper compensation, not because you need money, but because your knowledge is worth it. Margaret and I looked at each other. What do you think? I asked her. I think our daughter is asking us to help her build something that lasts. Margaret smiled. I think I'd like to be back in the boardroom, where I belong. We accepted. The announcement went out Monday morning. Workers who'd known us for decades came by to shake our hands, to say they were glad we were back. Margaret set up her office next to mine, same as it had been in the early years, when we'd worked side by side building something from nothing. Some mornings, I'd arrive early and find her already there, coffee brewing, reviewing reports with that same focused precision she'd shown for 43 years. You're here early, I'd say. Numbers don't sleep, she'd reply, and smile. Our son never apologized. His lawyers advised against contact while the criminal case proceeded. Maybe someday he'd understand what he'd lost. Not just the company, but the respect of people who'd believed in him. Or maybe he wouldn't. You can't force wisdom on someone determined to stay ignorant. But the company Margaret and I built, the company our daughter now led, it was thriving. Not just financially, but morally. Workers shared in profits. Innovation continued. Values mattered. On Friday afternoons, Margaret and I would leave together, driving home in the Lincoln, talking about the week's challenges and victories. Think Linda will be okay long-term? I asked once. She has something David never developed, Margaret said. Respect for the people who built the foundation she's standing on. She'll be more than okay. And she was right. She usually was. The woman who'd been told she didn't belong in the boardroom had saved the company from the man who thought he owned it. Sometimes the old ways aren't outdated. Sometimes they're just proven.